Some alarming words in that report. We're staying with climate matters. Arizona, Nevada, California, US, of course, saying this week that they're willing to cut back on their use of dwindling Colorado River. Now, this would be in exchange for money from the US federal government and to avoid forced cuts as drought threatens the key water supply for western states. The $1.2 billion plan, a potential breakthrough in a year-long stalemate, would conserve an additional 3 million acre-feet of water through 2026, when current guidelines for how the river is shared expire. Let's get some analysis. Carmen de Jong joins us, professor at the University of Strasbourg, where she is an expert in river management. Carmen, thank you very much for being with us. How has the situation become so serious along this Colorado River?
Well, it's a combination of different factors. First and foremost, it's climate change. And the Colorado is a very special river because it depends extremely heavily on the mountain water towers, or that means the Rockies. And it's about 90% of its discharge that it obtains from snow and water and rainfall from the mountains. So any trigger of climate change, any change in the snow, amount of snow falling in the snow cover will cause a reduction in the discharge. And further down, the basin is extremely dry, so the entire discharge depends on what is happening in the mountains. And the Colorado is really being hit very strongly by climate change. It's had a reduction of 20% of its discharge in the last 100 years, of which 16% reduction in only the last 20 years during this extreme drought. So first and foremost, it's the lack of snow that is causing this decrease. Then, of course, a very large population, 40 million people that depend, and it's still increasing. And then agriculture, irrigated agriculture. So it's incredible that 90% of the discharge of the Colorado is used for irrigation agriculture. So these are very big numbers.
Please excuse this, I don't mean this as a pun, but this seems like a perfect storm in terms of what is happening to the Colorado River. Is just changing man's use in the general sense, people's use of the water, enough to change it? Or do we need more things to happen?
Yes, well, first, definitely the water footprint has to be changed. There is an overuse of water for irrigation and also for household use. The per household use of water is much higher anyway in the States than in Europe. And of course, climate change is hitting so hard. Some of the predictions show that the Colorado River will have a 40% reduction of its discharge by 250. So that is a reality. And it may be that this change is going to accelerate with the El Nino effect that has been predicted for the next 5 years. So, of course, it will be good to mitigate climate change. But even then, the temperature increase will be so high that the states have to really change their way of using water and of using water in extremely arid catchment that has a lot of evapotranspiration, so a lot of water loss also due to climate change.
Indeed. Carmen, I hope you don't mind. Indulge me. I'm going to ask you about France, the River Seine, the problems we've been talking about, the temperature rising here in France apparently quicker than anywhere else. Do you foresee similar issues for instance, the River Seine and the other great rivers in France?
Yes, because if you look at the Paris basin, there are two problems. There's the River Seine and water quantity and quality, but there's also groundwater. There's groundwater over-exploitation. So the groundwater is being over-exploited at a rate that is already half that of Saudi Arabian basins. And of course, if there's less less rainfall coming in, the Seine basin will be heavily impacted. And it's also a basin comparable with the Colorado, where most of the water is used for irrigation, the rest, of course, for industry and for the population, for household water.
Indeed. It's not that long ago I can recall the Seine bursting its banks and places being underwater. It seems as the balance seems to be sort of going from our climate, which is clearly an alarming factor. Carmen de Jong, thank you very much indeed for giving us your insight, not only on Colorado, but the situation here in France too. Really appreciate it. Carmen de Jong, professor at the University of Strasbourg and expert, as we've heard, in river management. Carmen, thank you very much indeed.